Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Felix Dube will handle the first part of the session. I hand over to him.
Thank you, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings and welcome to this session of the ELA Student Conference. The theme of this session is climate change and nature-based solutions. For those who don't know me, my name is Felix Dube. I am a postdoctoral fellow here in the Faculty of Law. I conduct my research under the auspices of the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability. I will be chairing the share with Prof. Plessis, and we have 3 presentations. You will note that in the previous program, we had 4 speakers for this session, but unfortunately, one of them had to withdraw for reasons beyond his control. So we are now left with 3 speakers, 2 from the Northwest University and 1 from Stellenbosch University. The first speaker for this session is Mr. Onkarabile Osiele. Onkarabile is a student undertaking his LLM studies here in the Northwest University. He is conducting his research under the auspices of the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability. Mr. Osiele is going to speak about municipal planning law for climate change mitigation in South African cities. And then he will be followed by Muhammed Lokhat, who is also a master's student, but at the Stellenbosch University, who is going to speak about locating safe mobility for pedestrians and cyclists in section 24 of the Constitution. And then our last speaker will be Heloïze, who is an LLB student here at CLES at the Northwest University. She's going to speak about the legal relevance of nature-based solutions for sustainable urban development in South African secondary cities. And then after they have spoken, we are going to have a short discussion and engage them on their research. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Onkarabile Osiele to give us his presentation. Onkarabile, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dube, for the introduction. I'm trying to share my screen. Dr. Dube, I get the message here saying host disabled participant screen sharing.
No problem, Onkarabile. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to ask John if he can assist us on that. John, are you able to assist us?
I'm working on that. It should be possible now.
Thank you, John.
Onkarabile, are you succeeding?
Yes, Doctor, I'm succeeding. Thank you.
Awesome.
Are you able to see my screen, Dr. Dube?
Yes, we can see it very well. Please proceed if you are ready.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Dube, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Onkarabile Osiele, as Dr. Dube has indicated.
Sorry, Onkarabile, we can see the presenter's mode. I don't know if you are using 2 screens, perhaps you are sharing the other screen.
Oh. Is it still the same, Dr. Ranko?
It's not yet on presenter screen.
Presentation mode.
Yes, it's not yet on presentation mode.
Is it now?
Yes, it's perfect now. It's perfect now.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I will be presenting the contents of the study that I'm currently busy with, and the title is Municipal Planning Law for Climate Change Mitigation in South African Cities. The presentation is as follows. I'll firstly provide a brief background, then move to South African cities and GHG emissions, discuss then municipal planning law as a tool for climate change mitigation, and South Africa's national planning and climate change mitigation law and policy, move to discuss local level planning law and policy in Cape Town and the city of Tshwane, and have closing remarks. In the background, the study provides that climate change threatens human life, and this is due to its contribution to ecosystem degradation and vulnerability that is accompanied by increased floods, droughts, food insecurity, uncontrolled fires, and water scarcity. Climate change also poses a severe threat to those who are living in urban areas. Urban areas are likely to face some of the most severe impacts of climate change, such as heat waves, extreme weather events, rising sea levels, which may cause, amongst other things, coastal flooding. And cities such as Addis Ababa, Kampala, Cape Town, and Pretoria have and continue to experience climate environmental effects such as floods and droughts. Cities are not only victims to climate change, but they are adept climate change perpetrators. This is because, according to the UN Habitat, cities worldwide are responsible for approximately 77% of the greenhouse gas emissions released into the atmosphere. This is due to reliance on fossil fuels, such as coal-fired power plants, private transportation, and efficient use of energy in the buildings. However, cities are not only victims nor perpetrators of climate change, but they do offer a unique ability to assist their countries in responding to climate change. This can be done through the climate change awareness, as well as introduction of smaller scale mitigative measures, such as the use of solar energy in the built environment. Cities also have their own ways, as well as urban instruments that they can use to mitigate climate change, and this includes municipal planning. Municipal planning in South Africa denotes land use development and management planning, and legally it's a function that is assigned to municipalities in terms of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996. Now, moving to South African cities and GHG emissions, the study broadly provides that the African continent experiences rapid urbanization, and narrowly provides that South Africa, especially its economic hub, the province of Gauteng, is experiencing urbanization, and that urbanization has been identified as one of the major contributors to rising GHG emissions into the atmosphere, especially carbon dioxide. And Africa has its contribution. Cities, for instance, such as Cape Town, had 29% and 18% of the carbon emissions from the transport and residences, respectively, in 2017, whereas city of eThekwini in 2018 has had 40 carbon emissions from the transport. Cities are, however, making pledges to reduce emissions from transport, buildings, energy, and waste. Ethiopia's government in Addis Ababa has embarked on efficient transport system by adding urban electric rail and enabling fast and efficient bus transit in the city, which is an action that is crucial for climate mitigation. Similarly, the city of Cape Town has pledged to reach zero carbon emissions from both new and old buildings by 2030 and by 2050. Municipal planning is understood to be important when it comes to mitigating actions, since it involves the management as well as the use of land in the urban areas. This is because open spaces, air, water, and the built environment, which includes buildings and transportation, are part of the urban processes, and they are crucial when emissions are to be reduced. Municipal planning generally involves strategic and spatial planning, and the study itself focuses only on spatial planning. Through spatial planning, policy and regulatory measures that are related to the use of space could be used to promote climate change mitigation at the local level, such as the use of land for renewable energy projects, and also transitioning to energy efficient buildings, lower carbon transportation, integrated land use for the purposes of improved mobility, as well as the establishment of the carbon sinks. Spatial planning affects a city's urban design, land use, and the built environment, all of which also affects the GHG emissions, as I have indicated. Mitigation efforts to climate change also requires a considerable additional behavioral change by human beings. This is because human beings are at the center of the increased GHG emissions into the atmosphere, and this behavioral change can also be effected by regulatory and policy instruments. For instance, the City of Tshwane has a green building bylaw of 2013, which requires new buildings, refurbishment, and as well as retrofits to ensure that at least 10% of the energy consumption is generated from renewable energy, and is followed by cities such as also Cape Town, which introduces or practices energy efficiency in its homes or within the homes that are within its jurisdiction. Considering now South Africa's national planning and climate change mitigation law and policy, this is to look at the local government's duties as well as and responsibilities regarding climate change mitigation. Firstly, the study considers the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996. Now, in South Africa, planning operates within the legal framework, which ensures that municipalities deliver their developmental orientated goals under Section 153 and Section 152, as well as Section 153 of the Constitution. Both the provisions imposes a duty on all organs of state to provide a safe and a healthy environment for all, and grant municipalities also to manage their own affairs. This is in terms of Section 155 of the Constitution. Now, municipal planning, as I have indicated, also finds itself in Section 156, that is right with Schedule 4 of the Constitution. And the Constitution again provides that the state must respect, preserve, and promote the rights in the Bill of Rights, and this also includes Section 24 of the Constitution. Chapter 7 of the Constitution puts a duty on the government to protect the environment and directly applies to municipal planning. Now, with municipal planning, municipalities have a primary authority over land use as well as development, over buildings, over city parks, over streets and roads, as well as recycling and waste disposal, all of which are critical mitigative measures. Municipalities are empowered to introduce their own bylaws, to adopt their own single-use plans and their own and also the land use schemes under the Special Planning Land Use Management Act 16 of 2013, which is a key planning legislation in the Republic of South Africa. Now, with these bylaws and policies, municipalities could, for instance, regulate and encourage the greening of the city, for example, retrofitting of green walls, roofs, as well, and this also reduces energy consumption within the built environment. And with land use schemes, special development frameworks, they can protect the green infrastructure and reserve land for efficient land use practices, thereby mitigating climate change. Now, both the Constitution of the Republic and special planning also have they harmonize, or they are in harmony with the Local Government Municipal Systems Act 32 of 2000, the Integrated Urban Development Framework Policy of 2016, the National Climate Change Response Plan White Paper of 2011, and all these following laws, which also grant municipalities with the powers to introduce their own regulatory and instruments and policy instruments to mitigate climate change, as well as by imposing duties on the municipalities to act or to respond to climate change. Local city planning law and policy in the city of Cape Town and the city of Tshwane, the study looks at the cities to look at the progress that both cities have made when regulating, as well as passing policy for climate change mitigation, or using their planning law as a measure for climate change mitigation. Now, for the interest of time, I've looked at one policy and one law for each city, and both cities have the laws as planning laws and policies that shows us the stance of both cities when it comes to climate change, mitigation. The city of Cape Town's municipal planning bylaw, as well as Tshwane's land use management bylaw, they regulate the use of land within both cities, and they both have their municipal special development frameworks, which also regulate the use and the development of land, and binds all property owners in their jurisdiction. And also they have the climate change response strategy, which provides that both cities recognize that they have to take action against climate change, and also provide the pledges for climate change mitigation, and they can actually use their municipal planning bylaws to effect these goals, as well as these pledges that they make, even though there seem to be a blur link between the city's planning law and both cities' planning law and climate change mitigation. However, we can infer from both their planning laws that they can be able to use them for climate mitigation, especially in sectors in the transport sector, as well as in the transport sector, which falls together with buildings under the built environment. So those was my concluding remarks, that both cities do have the laws and policies in place. And when I'm looking at these policies, and when I'm looking at these laws, even though the cities are empowered, but by the look of things, or when I'm studying their policies and their laws, it looks to me like the cities have not really progressed to mitigate climate change in their own areas. And I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, Chairs, Dr. Dube and Professor du Plessis.
Thank you, Untitled Osiele, for this insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure we'll all agree that climate change is a threat not only to global survival, but also to global peace and security. While we can all contribute to mitigating climate change, I think that Onkarabile study is relevant in that the greatest role is going to be played not really by national governments, but also cities and other local governments. I understand that you may have a lot of questions to ask Mr. Onkarabile or some comments on his presentations, but may I please ask for your indulgence? Please hold on to the questions, or if you can, and I actually encourage it, you can actually write your questions on the chat there. We're going to note them, and then when the last speaker has spoken, we are going to visit each speaker and have a discussion with them. So our next speaker is Muhammed, who is going to speak about safe mobility for pedestrians and cyclists under Section 24 of the South African Constitution. Muhammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Dube. Just give me a second to set up, please.
No problem.
All right, so can I confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I see a notification here that you have started sharing the screen, but it could be an issue with my broadband. I can't see your presentation as yet.
Give me a second.
Oh, yes, there it is.
All right, there we go. Make this full screen.
Just put on presentation mode, Muhammed, please. There you are.
Yes, is it sorted?
Yes.
All
Yes,
right, brilliant. All right, let me sort out. Firstly, thank you to the organizers of this conference for allowing me to speak, and thank you to Onkarabile. Your presentation was incredibly insightful and has a lot of relevance to my research as well. My name is Muhammed Lokhat, and I've just begun my master's studies at the University of Stellenbosch, and therefore, this study and this paper is also in its beginning stages as well. Entitled Locating Safe Mobility for Pedestrians and Cyclists within Section 24 of the Constitution, I aim to provide a rights-based framework for safe mobility in South African cities. So basically, the outline of the paper would start off with the premise, and that would be that the Constitution of South Africa confers the so-called environmental rights upon all South Africans. And it firstly guarantees an environment that is not harmful to health or well-being, and thereafter, the state is mandated via its legislative powers and otherwise to ensure that environment that isn't harmful by preventing pollution and ecological degradation, promoting conservation and securing ecologically sustainable development, as well as using natural resources while promoting justifiable economic and social development. Everyone is aware of that within an environmental law conference. The premise of my study comes in when looking at the South African built environment. It's incredibly built around the private car, and I'd go so far as saying that it's a hellscape for pedestrians and cyclists. And this is primarily due to our entire built environment and urban spaces being built for and around the private vehicle, and in particular, the private car. And I draw on the definition of a private vehicle from the National Land Transportation Act, which means that it's a motorized vehicle other than a motor quadricycle, a motor tricycle that can seat up to 9 people, including the driver. So now that we understand this here, that South Africa's built environment is built around the car, this does not actually reflect the reality of how South Africans actually travel around. Most South Africans walk to work or walk to where they need to. Just 27% of South Africans drive cars to work. And this pales in comparison to the percentage that also utilize public transport. And it's also similar to the percentage of workers and other people that walk to work and cycle as well. So therefore, most people don't use cars. Most people walk to work or cycle or use public transport. But it's the people that walk to work and cycle to work that are the most vulnerable on our roads. And pedestrian fatalities, the statistics are that pedestrian fatalities occur for almost around 40% of all fatalities countrywide. And in Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape, which are the most built up and urbanized provinces, this figure increases to more than 50% of all road crashes involving one or more pedestrian deaths. And most of these fatalities, right, occur while pedestrians cross the road, about 65% or so. About 15% occurs when pedestrians or cyclists are in the road, and around 10% occur when pedestrians are on the road reserve or the road verges. And as well for cyclists, despite South Africa having a very relatively low number of cyclists worldwide, we still have more than 18 times the world average with regards to cyclists being in terms of road fatalities that cyclists constitute. So many studies across the world show that it's the presence of private vehicles and the right of way, the immense amount of space given to them on our roads and streets, which represents this significant danger for pedestrians, cyclists, and especially children. So we design, if I can go on to this next quote, the second quote here, it's more about how we design our places, right? That shows it's how we design our places that constitutes how fast cars can travel. And that's how our roads are designed, to maintain the speed of motorists across a place. And survival rates for pedestrians are much higher when cars are slower, and impact speeds below 30 kilometers per hour. So if a pedestrian gets hit by a car that's traveling at 30 kilometers per hour, their survival rate is about 90%, and it decreases exponentially as that impact speed increases. But if you look at the speed limits in our urban areas, they do not reflect that. 30 kilometers should be the norm in urban areas, whereas the speed limit is about 60 kilometers in public roads in urban areas, 100 kilometers on public roads outside urban areas, and 120 kilometers on freeways. So this is reflected across many strategies and laws, especially the National Development Plan. And there's two main strategies that South Africa uses to actually lower the amount of pedestrian and cyclist fatalities. Sorry?
I think someone's mic is on. Can you just mute, please?
Okay. So there's two main ways that South Africa aims to lower the amount of pedestrian and cyclist fatalities, and that's integration and segregation. So integration involves involving pedestrians with the road traffic and managing their movements through something called temporal separation, which are pedestrian crossings, traffic lights, and soft separation, like traffic calming measures, like narrowing roads, roundabouts, rumble strips, speed bumps, etc. And all of these aim to prevent motorized traffic from traveling at high speeds, those high speeds that are considered to endanger pedestrians, the above 30 kilometers per hour figure. And the other aspect of this, which is segregation, involves separating pedestrians from road traffic. So you either do that horizontally or vertically via pedestrian malls, sidewalks, pavements, or separate roadways. And the vertical aspect of that is pedestrian overpasses or underpasses, but that has its own complexity in terms of where the pedestrians actually use it. So a 1996 report pointed out that all these factors that factors such as cost restraint has meant that these approaches are less evident in South Africa when you compare to developed countries. So it's not a case that we don't have the money. It's a case that most of our money is spent on the minority of South Africans that actually do drive. And this is not reinventing the wheel. As you would note from the first quote, pedestrians, this is a quote from Dala Umar, the former Minister of Transport at the time. And in his forward presenting the cyclist and pedestrian framework for South Africa, the policy for design of roads, this is what he said, that pedestrians and cyclists are the most vulnerable road user groups. And yet all these years later, we still are in the same reality. So when we look at engineering modifications, they are the most effective way of reducing motor vehicle and pedestrian collisions, right? But they're not the only type. There's others such as education, such as visibility, etc. So to come to the crux of it, and allow me to go back to the outline of the paper, the legal framework that I draw this from is to place safe mobility within the Brown environmental agenda that Prof. Du Plessis has set up. And she states that that the Brown environmental agenda is the understanding that social issues can't be separated from the environment in applying Section 24 to the urban environment. And these social issues that constitute the Brown environmental agenda include, and she quotes, imbalances in patterns of production and consumption that result in unequal access to opportunities, resources, and services. And all of this concerns the effects that human activity has a particular bearing on lower income groups. And as we've said, this is particularly relevant to mobility, that poorer people are more likely to walk to work, or cycle to work, or where they need to be. And as you go above the income groups, richer people drive cars. So Professor Anel Du Plessis importantly states that this environmental right is uncoupled from municipal service delivery, and that a consequence of this is that the environmental right can't be said to concretely influence municipal decision-making and planning. And the design and implementation of environmental governance instrumentation such as IDPs, your integrated development plans, your spatial development frameworks, and particularly your land use schemes. And I speak about this importantly because although roads are a cross-cutting issue across all three spheres of government, you have your national roads, you have your provincial roads, as well as your local roads. The biggest number of roads and the biggest kilometerage of roads are within the competency of municipalities.
Mohammed?
National roads, yes?
Mohammed, sorry for speaking over you. I have already stolen 2 or so minutes from the discussion. If you can just try to draw to a close, I'll be grateful.
Okay, all right. Next, my paper would draw on from the 2017 paper written by Thomas Coggins and Marius Peters regarding a right to transport. In that paper, they said that a right to transport can be inferred from or constitutes a logical component of many of the provisions in our Bill of Rights. That in order to achieve achieve many of the other rights and access many of the other rights, such as transport, housing, etc., one needs to read a right to transport into the Constitution. So they also draw from Henry Lefebvre the right to the city discourse in making that assumption. And I'd like to I separate my framework from that, in that I read I don't look at safe mobility as a separate right that can be looked at. It's part of the environmental right. And This is based on Thomas Coggan's recent paper as well, which is recalibrating everyday space using Section 24 of the Constitution. Although he looks at it differently, he looks at the freedom of movement contrasted with the freedom of security of the person, and he uses Section 24, the environmental right, to resolve that dispute. I follow a similar line of thinking. And to wrap up in the interest of time, I see I've got 1 minute left. If we look at the consequences for reading this environmental right into, reading safe mobility into the environmental right, it would look at budgeting, whereas recent research from Open Streets in the context of Cape Town has looked at that just 2% of the city's budget is used for non-motorized transport for pedestrians and cyclists, and 98% of that transport budget is used for roads and for primarily private cars. And this has consequences for zoning and land use, which is an exclusive municipal planning, which is a local government competency, as well as road design, which follows various guidelines and down. And yeah, just to conclude, this is a very locating safe mobility within the environmental rights will assist in providing the political impetus to shift to more sustainable, safe, and equitable forms of urban structures and transport. And without this right-based approach, the design of public policies is not done properly. So the state, and particularly local government, but not exclusively, has this positive duty to ensure that public spaces are designed to be accessible to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Muhammed, for this very interesting and insightful presentation on safe mobility for pedestrians and cyclists under Section 24 of the South African Constitution. To me, the novelty of your presentation lies in linking the environmental right in Section 24 of the Constitution to safe mobility for pedestrians and cyclists in South Africa. Without further ado, I am going to invite Heloïze to grace us with her presentation, after which we will engage all of you. I understand that Heloïze is going to speak about the legal relevance of nature-based solutions for sustainable development in South African secondary cities. Heloïze, the floor is yours.
Hello, Dr. Dube. I just want to ensure, am I audible?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. And can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. My presentation today will briefly look into South African environmental law and the relatively new concept of nature-based solutions. I will address the following question. To what extent is South African environmental law attuned to the idea of nature-based solutions for sustainable urban development in secondary cities? Firstly, secondary cities as a concept will be discussed, providing background and definitions, and then thereafter nature-based solutions, or actually first sustainable urban development, then nature-based solutions, then secondary cities, all will be discussed, first providing background, then definitions, and then lastly, environmental law will come into focus, evaluating these concepts against environmental law, and then I will set out my conclusions in attempt to answer the stated question. So nature-based solutions has many definitions, but the one that is globally most accepted reads as follows. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition is known as the Brundtland Commission's definition. And the bottom line is that most global definitions boil down to the same few basic elements. So firstly, sustainable urban development is an ongoing process and not an end state. Secondly, it is concerned with the needs of future generations and has a long-term perspective. And lastly, it focuses equally on human and ecological health by ensuring that ecosystems are protected and stay protected during rapid urban development. The South African definition, on the other hand, is found in the National Environmental Management Act. This definition requires social, economic, and environmental factors to be integrated into development as a triple bottom line to ensure that the development serves the needs of both present as well as future generations. So it's obvious that all three elements that are evident in global definitions are also evident in the NEMA definition, placing the South African definition right on par with other globally accepted definitions. Then moving on to nature-based solutions, the European Commission provides a definition of nature-based solutions that encompasses all possible solutions that nature could possibly provide or inspire, while the IUCN definition focuses more on restoration and protection of ecosystems as a specific element. This protection of ecosystems is but one of the solutions that the European Commission definition envisions, and this is thus the point of overlap between the two institutions' provided definitions. Both definitions state that natural solutions will then address the social, economic, and environmental challenges that is associated with development. For example, parks, green roofs, and treed walkways have a natural cooling effect, are aesthetically appealing to city inhabitants, and provide places to meet and exercise. For another example is restored wetlands and rivers support the sustainability of livelihoods embedded in the fishing industry and also enhances ecotourism centralized around these areas. The protection of ecosystems in urban areas has beneficial effects that address these mentioned social, economic, and environmental issues. It is then from this exposition that the two fundamental elements of nature-based solutions can be identified. The first is the protection of ecosystems, and then the second is addressing social, economic, and environmental challenges. These two elements are then what guided the inquiry into the South African environmental law that will follow later in this presentation. Secondary cities, or also known as intermediate cities, perform important functions in the natural structure of cities. Although South Africa has no official list, the South African Cities Network identified secondary cities based on a quasi-official list compiled by the National Treasury. The Treasury used the categories of municipalities, population size, the size of the economy as criteria, and since this quasi-official list was first published, the South African Cities Network have been expanding it, and there are currently 39 secondary cities on this list. The expansions were mainly motivated by population size, and Maré et al. Are of the opinion that population size as sole factor for the inclusion on this list was an incorrect approach. But nevertheless, this list remains the main indicator of secondary cities in South Africa. Secondary cities are also then further mainly identified according to the municipal area and not necessarily the specific town in that area. There are two main functions that cities perform. They distribute population more evenly across the country, which aids the distribution of development as well. These cities thus prevent development from being predominantly confined to metropolitan areas to the detriment of other rural areas. Furthermore, secondary cities act as a link between these metropolitan areas and rural areas. They provide higher order goods, employment, schools, health and financial services, etc. to rural areas and that would normally not be available to them since they are these services are mostly centralized in metros, which are in many instances not accessible to rural areas. Secondary cities, however, are close enough to metros to benefit from these goods and services, but also far enough removed from metropolitans to provide these goods and services to rural areas in a more accessible manner. So, in summary, a preliminary conclusion can be made. Firstly, nature-based solutions and sustainable urban development share a link in that both concepts are concerned with the same factors. Sustainable urban development seeks to integrate social, economic, and environmental factors, and nature-based solutions, on the other hand, seeks to address challenges experienced in these spheres. Sustainable urban development and secondary cities could mean that sustainability is spread across the whole country, because secondary cities' function of ensuring more even distribution of population and growth aids then the distribution of this sustainable urban development. So the following bottom line is therefore clear. Implementation of nature-based solutions in secondary cities could be a useful tool in the strive for sustainable urban development. And the benefits nature-based solutions could provide in secondary cities would probably not be confined to development in those cities alone, but it would probably influence development in metros and then rural areas as well. This then brings me to South African environmental law. Section 24 of the Constitution sets out every person's right to a safe and healthy environment. The scope of this right is important in the context of sustainable urban development, nature-based solutions in secondary cities, because all other environmental legislation operate within this scope. The meaning of environment in the Section 24 right is argued to include cities and the urban area. A definition for environment, again found in the NEMA, refers to the physical, chemical, aesthetic, and cultural properties that influence human well-being. This forms the basis for the conclusion that the environment includes all surroundings of humans and not only natural surroundings. The duties of local government, as set out by Section 152 of the Constitution, and then also the environmental duty of local government, can therefore be founded within the same area, namely the urban landscape. The scope of the Section 24 right thus encompasses secondary city environment that local government should be concerned with when striving for sustainable urban development. Oh, sorry. At this stage, I just quickly want to explain how I approach the inquiry into the following acts. As previously mentioned, the two elements of nature-based solutions served as a guide. The text of the acts were examined closely to determine if there was any sort of reference made to one or both of the elements. This reference could have been explicit or direct, such as a direct provision for the protection of ecosystems, for example, but it could also have been more implicit or implied, which would then obviously require some form of interpretation. If this interpretation then did not conform to general logic, it was disregarded and the conclusion was made that no reference to any of the elements or one, depending on the specific wording, exists in that act. So moving on to the NEMA, the Section 22 principles, of the NEMA directly refer to the protection, restoration, and management of ecosystems as the first element of nature-based solutions. Furthermore, the anthropocentric approach of these principles also necessitates focus on social issues, which construes the social challenges that nature-based solutions aim to address. Sustainable development is a main theme and goal of the NEMA, and it creates a framework in which nature-based solutions could easily fit. Because the three dimensions of social, economic, and environmental sustainability, as encapsulated by the NEMA, are also the three spheres in which nature-based solutions work, as I indicated previously. Nature-based solutions are also reflected in integrated environmental management because of the continuous reference to the Section 2 principles, as well as the consideration of the impacts of activities and decisions on social, economic, and environmental factors. The National Water Act, in the National Water Act, the explicit mention of the protection of ecosystems in Section 2 and the inclusion of aquatic and riparian ecosystems in the definition of water resources and watercourses support the Act's purpose of protecting and conserving water resources. The National Water Strategy, the Minister's power to make regulations, matters related to licenses, and the powers and functions of catchment agencies all share some link with the protection and conservation of ecosystems. This repeated reference to the protection of water resources therefore points to the first element of nature-based solutions. Furthermore, equitable access to water and the promotion of economic and social development are also factors mentioned throughout the National Water Act. By emphasizing these social, economic, and environmental considerations, the Act aims to address social, economic, and ecological challenges, which is thus then the second element of nature-based solutions. So coming to sectoral environmental legislation, the Biodiversity Act was promulgated specifically to protect South Africa's biodiversity, which includes ecosystems as a whole and not only individual organisms. Given the definition of biodiversity, every reference to the conservation, management, and protection of biodiversity is then also indirectly relevant for nature-based solutions. The Biodiversity Act also provides directly for the protection of ecosystems. The first element of nature-based solutions is thus very deeply embedded in this Act. The aim of the Biodiversity Act provides for a part of the second element of nature-based solutions because the environmental challenges that nature-based solutions aim to address could include loss of biodiversity. The social and economic challenges, however, are not addressed directly in the Biodiversity Act. But since frameworks and plans as required by this Act must be consistent with the NEMA principles, it can be argued that the Biodiversity Act implicitly and indirectly provides for the second element of nature-based solutions, because as I discussed previously, the NEMA principles fully accommodate for nature-based solutions. References to both elements of nature-based solutions are more express and direct in the Protected Areas Act. The protection of ecosystems must be one of the main aims of the declaration of an area as a protected area, and once such area is declared, the purpose thereof must be to continue to protect that specific ecosystem. There is thus no doubt that the Protected Areas Act fits the first element of nature-based solutions. A similar conclusion can be made with regards to the second element because the provisions of the Protected Areas Act are concerned with the economic and social development of the country. This can be seen by the repeated mention thereof in sections pertaining to when a protected area can be declared and the purpose of protected areas and the integration thereof in management plans. The Integrated Coastal Management Plan also clearly refers to both elements of nature-based solutions. The provisions of the Act directly entail the protection of ecosystems and considerations to both social and economic factors that are related to the coastal environment, as well as the communities situated within that coastal environment. Social issues such as land for housing and the livelihoods of communities are explicitly mentioned alongside the conservation and protection of coastal environments. The Integrated Coastal Management Act provides for the creation of zones and management areas that will ensure adequate protection is afforded to coastal environments while still keeping the community's social and economic needs in focus. The Integrated Coastal Management Act therefore protects the coastal ecosystems so that social, economic, and environmental factors can enjoy the attention that they should receive. This reflects the protection of ecosystems as the first element of nature-based solutions, and then also the second element of effectively addressing social, economic, and ecological challenges. So considering everything that has been said up until now, to what extent then is South African law attuned to nature-based solutions for sustainable urban development in South African secondary cities? Firstly, Section 24 extends the right to the urban area, placing secondary cities squarely within the application of this right. This right therefore expects local government to ensure that cities are environmentally resilient, and Section 152 expects government to provide in the basic social and economic needs of communities. The Constitution therefore seems to welcome the use of nature-based solutions, since local government's environmental duty and the Section 152 duties could possibly be realized simultaneously if nature-based solutions are employed. Furthermore, South African law is greatly attuned to nature-based solutions, since it has mostly explicit and direct references to both elements of nature-based solutions. All of the acts contain direct and explicit references to both elements, as I said, except for the Biodiversity Act. The Biodiversity Act obviously refers to the protection of ecosystems as the first element, but the second element is less clear. It does not entirely disregard the second element, since it can be inferred from mentions of the Section 2 principles of the NEMA. These principles revolve around the humans and their needs and social, economic, and environmental issues and challenges. And since the NEMA then is framework legislation and interpretation, as I explained earlier in the presentation, to conclude that the Biodiversity Act makes implicit references to the second element is not ill-founded. All these acts, all the other acts actually, then explicitly and in many cases repeatedly mention the protection of ecosystems as the first element of nature-based solutions, and also economic and social development, which then closely links to the second element of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions, being a new and somewhat unconventional approach, will receive more and more attention in South Africa as governments worldwide turn to nature for answers to complex developmental issues such as climate change, poverty, and unsustainable urbanization. And it seems as if South African environmental law will not only accommodate the use of nature-based solutions, but it will welcome the use thereof. Thank you.
Thank you, Heloïze. I already see that questions are bubbling in the chat. I'm going to hand over to Prof. Du Plessis to guide us through the discussion. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, and thank you for very interesting and I think linked presentations by all of you. Felix, your hand is still up. Do you want to say something? Tanya referred to its a legacy hand. Warren,
Yes.
would you like to pose your question to Onkarabile? And if you have subsequent, perhaps to the others too.
Thanks, Willemien. Yes, thanks, Onkarabile. This was a very interesting paper. I just picked up on, I think it was your last point, the point about actually implementing these municipal climate mitigation, frameworks, policies, guides, and so on. I mean, I think you made the point that they're not really being implemented. And I was just wondering what sort of steps you thought could be taken to implement. Thanks.
Maricel, I see you also had a question for Onkarabile. Perhaps you can also pose your question or summarize it.
Good day. Thank you, Prof. Willemien. Yes, Onkarabile, I was wondering to what extent do you think municipalities are successful in using the planning instruments that you mentioned to address climate change mitigation in their jurisdiction, and whether you think that, or to your knowledge or experience or research, are they experiencing any challenges that prevents them from implementing or formulating these instruments to start with? And if they do experience these challenges, what might be the reasons for such challenges?
And then lastly, Melandri, would you like to pose your question? Melandri seemed to be lost. She said, regarding climate mitigation, have you considered the options or avenues for accessing financing for mitigation efforts in municipalities? So Onkarabile, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Du Plessis. And thank you, Warren, Marichal, as well as Melandri for the questions. Usually, Warren, implementation is a challenge to our municipalities, and this has been also raised yesterday. I think Marichal touched on that also. But the steps that comes to my mind for the implementation of this instrument is providing the municipality leaders or staff with skills that are necessary for the implementation of this instrument for climate change mitigation. You would find that the people that are vested with this duty to enforce these legal instruments are not really well equipped with what they are required, to do. So, and this has also been raised in a City of Cape Town's climate change strategy, I think of 2019, where the city acknowledged that indeed there is a lack of skill when it comes to enforcing or putting into effect this climate change instrument. And I think that should be made, that program, empowering them with the knowledge to enforce these instruments could be made to the staff, maybe under the departments within our municipalities that are focusing, focusing on climate change response. And if the local government do not have those departments, then I do think or argue that they should then be established so that they can be a body that deals with implementing this instrument. And coming to Marichel's question, I do think also it can be linked to that of Warren, but through the perusal when I was looking at these instruments for the cities, most of the time I find that there are goals within these instruments, such as special development frameworks and land use schemes, which relate to climate change mitigation, and therefore municipalities are able to use this instrument for climate change mitigation. But the thing is, I do not find examples where municipalities are using these instruments to mitigate climate change, or to respond to climate change. So they do have the instruments, but the concern is that they are not being used really as they should to mitigate climate change. And one of the challenges that the cities also have when it comes to the implementation of these instruments is also finance, as Melandri, relating to Melandri's question, because the cities are bestowed with responsibilities, socio-economic responsibilities. So they kind of having a challenge to balance response to climate change and also delivering their mandates to the communities. So the challenges is finance, is also what I have raised, the lack of skill to put into effect this instrument. And moving to Melandri's question, truly it has passed. It has crossed my mind, but I didn't look really into that, into how will the cities get finances. But something that I can think of is that when they are embarking on these projects, efficient use of energy within maybe the built environment, for instance, maybe cities, they could apply for funding from these international city networks, that the networks such as C40. I'm not really sure about that, but I do think that they can be able to raise to request funding from such international bodies which advocates for the response to climate change. I hope I have answered the questions raised by the colleagues. Thank you, Professor Willemien.
Thank you, Onkarabile. We're moving over to Muhammed. Maricel, can you summarize your question, please? Thank you, Onkarabile.
Sure, Professor, I will. Thank you for the interesting discussion, Mohammed. I was just wondering what steps can be used to promote the use of the existing pedestrian infrastructure as found in cities, and preventing these pedestrians from then crossing roads, such as highways, for instance, where they are living next to such highways in informal settlements or so on. And I was thinking in terms of what would be the incentive for them, because I think sometimes these walkways are situated pretty far from where they live, and it might be easier for them to just cross the road to get to where they need to go faster. And in your research, did you look at the vandalization and safety of these pedestrian walkways or infrastructure?
Thank you, Maricel. Prof. Warren?
Thanks, Willemien. Yes, also, Muhammad, really a great presentation, such an interesting topic. I was just taken by your point about the speed limit in urban areas really being ideally 30 kilometers, not the current 60 or 80 or 120. And that made me think about the motor car industry itself and what responsibilities it has to ensure cyclist and pedestrian safety. And I was wondering whether you were going to look at the motor car industry in your research.
Thank you, Prof. Warren. Melandri, we want to summarize yours?
Thank you, Prof. Willemien. I'm sorry if you can't hear me. My network is a bit slow.
Now we hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for a very interesting and insightful presentation, Muhammad. I was just wondering whether, according to you or in your research, whether you've seen that the design or the planning of cities specifically makes it incompatible or not conducive for pedestrians or cyclists, as we see in most of South African cities, and not even just the cities, that the areas are designed in such a manner that it's mostly for the motorists. It's really not conducive for pedestrians. So I was wondering if planning law might be the problem here, or how we plan the cities. How can we address these deficiencies in order to solve those problems? Thank you.
Thank you, Melandri. Kirsten, you want to pose your question? She struggles. She also asks and say, thank you for your presentation and taking a rights-based approach to mobility. What is your perspective on pollutant emissions and degradation of air quality as it refers to cities favoring a vehicle-based approach? And then I've seen a bit lower down, there's another one asking a question for you from Prof. Anal. Anal, do you want to pose the question?
Thank you, Willemien. I quickly can. I just want to know from Muhammad, given that mobility is such a complex issue and it involves so many interests, many of them financial in nature, whether or not adopting a rights-based approach can be confined to the environmental right, and whether or not one should not adopt a broader rights-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Anal. Muhammad, over to you.
All right, thank you to the participants for asking me these questions, and I'm going to attempt to answer them in the best way that I can. I do notice that there are some overlaps, so I will between the questions, particularly Maricel and Melandri's, as well as yeah. So I'm going to try to answer it. So firstly, to Maricel, that's the problem. The incentive is that there's not enough safe mobility there's not enough safe options for pedestrians to walk. So very often you'd look at a road and somebody's put it this way, you can notice where one tender for a sidewalk ends and the next one starts, because the sidewalk just abruptly ends randomly and then it's just road thereafter. So it forces the pedestrian to walk on the road in that unsafe environment. And that just goes to show the priority that pedestrians have in this hierarchy of mobility in our cities. And that's the problem. I think I would have a more radical approach or answer to your question, in that if a highway or a road is going through a densely populated area where people are bound to walk on that road, then it shouldn't have such a high speed limit, especially considering the chance that it may hit. And education can go so far. You can tell people as many times as you can, do not walk on the highway or look both ways, but there's going to be times when people are in a rush, or for children in that circumstance, where they will run onto the road and face that possibility of being hit by a speeding car. I think the statistic was that just between 2015 and 2017, 1,500 or so children died on our roads. So it's a case that we're not going to solve this issue via education. We need to solve it via design, and that's going to be the main incentive for people to stay in their lane, so to say. And no, my research is not looking into the vandalization and safety aspect of it. If I can go on to the next question, which is by you, Prof. Willemien. It's that in the Netherlands, if a car is hit by a cyclist, the driver of the car is liable, and the cyclists have the right of way. I'm not too sure if what the situation is if a pedestrian is hit by a cyclist, though. And this is a question that's very interesting, and I do want to touch on a few aspects of it. In that, in South Africa, like when we refer to car crashes, most people just use the term accident, and that has implications for like the delictual and criminal aspects of it, in that the term accident itself implies that there's a break in that causal relationship, or that there's some sort of intervening act, that it wasn't by design that the car hit somebody and they died. So that's one point that I wanted to make, and that it should change, and I did include that in my presentation towards the end, that the liability aspect of this should change from one based on negligence to one based on strict liability. So yes, but I'm not too clued up on the delictual and criminal law aspects of this here. Just an interesting point as well with regards to criminal law is that pedestrians have fewer constitutional rights or fewer constitutional protections against search and seizure on what's on their body than somebody in a car has on what's in the boot of their car. So the deck is completely stacked against cyclists and pedestrians, completely in favor of private cars. So, but to answer your last question, Prof. Willemien, it's that if a pedestrian is hit by a cyclist, I'd say that it should be that is the cyclist outside of where they should be? Is the cyclist intoxicated? Is the cyclist following the rules of the road? That's like a normative sort of inquiry that can be taken. And that also speaks to the need for separated infrastructure for cyclists, for pedestrians. We need those fit spikies, those separated bicycle lanes for cyclists, as well as adequate sidewalks for pedestrians. To answer your question, Prof. Freeman, that's a very interesting question. The responsibilities of the motor car industry in promoting a safe mobility for pedestrians and cyclists. So this also has implications beyond the motor car industry, and I haven't looked at it as yet, but it would be an interesting avenue to look at. It has for the insurance industry as well, in that in the event of a crash, is it the people in the car, or is it the pedestrians, the people outside the car, etc.? What implication does that have? And as well as I think the motor vehicle industry, when they're doing their when they're doing their tests and whatnot, they look at the crash worthiness of a car, and that speaks to the safety of the inhabitants within the car. It doesn't look at pedestrians that they may hit as well. I think that's an interesting point to raise, and it also has implications going into the realm of AI as well, which would be interesting in my view. Would an AI-driven car focus on the safety of the inhabitants of that car if it's inevitably going to crash into a pedestrian, or should it avoid the pedestrian at risk to the people within the car itself? So yes, the motor car industry definitely does need to have more of a responsibility with regards to safety. And I also want to bring up this final point, which is the complete flooding of South Africa and worldwide with SUVs and bigger cars compared to the previous few years. I'm sure everyone is aware of this. Everyone wants their massive, what's it called, Fortuner or whatnot. And that has massive implications for safety of people. Like if a small car, like a sedan, hits an adult, right? That person is thrown over and above, and they have a higher chance of surviving that crash compared to when somebody is hit by that brute front force of a massive SUV or truck, which drags the adult or the person underneath the chassis of the vehicle. So that has its implications. Why are SUVs flooding the market? It could have to do with tax or whatnot law. So I do hope that answers your question. And if we move on to Melandri's question, what are your thoughts on the design or planning of cities with regards to mobility? Do you think urban areas might be designed in a manner that is not compatible or conducive for pedestrians and cyclists? I'd say yes, planning is a major part of it. And this has its roots in the apartheid era, where this notion of separate development, and the apartheid government put a lot of money in the highway system at the expense of other forms of transport. And that's led to the mushrooming of the minibus taxi industry and etc. So I think it was even Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, was even quoted as saying that we want to develop the train system for the natives, which leaves our highways for Europeans. And I can share that quote with whoever is interested in hearing it. So that just goes to show the sort of thinking that went into designing our road system and why it is, and not just to lay the blame on apartheid. It's been entrenched by the post-apartheid government as well. So yes, planning has a large part to play in it. And I think there's this disconnect between the planners, the transport planners, the municipal planners, the people that design places, and the people on the ground will actually use them. If you look at any large shopping mall, for example, like the people that come on the main road and get dropped off with a taxi or walk to that place have to pass through a massive parking lot to reach the shops, whereas the people that come with their normal private cars can just park outside the shop and don't have to walk around a fence or run through hurdles and walk through grass to reach that place. So I say yes, planning has a lot of parts to play in this, and with regards to even the amount of parking that's required, and Prof. Friedman would know this. He supervised my mini dissertation on minimum parking requirements. That each specific land use requires a specific number of parking bays that has to be built with that, and that promotes less reliance on public transport. It makes the entire environment less conducive towards parking. And there's so many more little, I want to say 1,000 cuts that contributes to our entire built environment. It's completely shaped around, by, for the car and against the pedestrians. To answer Kirsten's questions, what's your perspective on pollutant emissions and degradation of air quality? I think this speaks to NEMA Air Quality Act, as well as the recent carbon guidelines that have been released, but I'm not too clued up on that, to be honest with you. So private cars degrade our cities in 3 ways. Firstly, by GHG, by greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, by sustaining those inequitable mobilities where people are placed 40 kilometers away from where they need to be, and they're implicitly needed to buy a car to go where they need to be. I'm sure, as the lawyers in this call would know, this was recently a contentious issue as well, where the legal practitioners were required to have a driver's license and their own car in order to practice, or in order to interview for a job. And yeah, it's that's the second aspect. And the third aspect of it is safety, obviously. So I chose to focus on safety for the purpose of this one here, because if you focus on all three, then you're going to end up with a massive amount of work to do, and I hope to reach that stage one day. Any Prof. Anel's question, if I can come to it, I'm wondering whether you see a rights-based approach to mobility being dependent on the protection of rights other than the environmental right. And I hope I'm understanding this question correctly. I wanted to differentiate my study from Thomas Coggan and Maurice Peters' study, where they look at the right to transport. And they say that this right to transport can be implicitly read from the Bill of Rights because transport is public transport in particular, that's what their focus is on, is needed to focus on, is needed to achieve those other rights that are in the Bill of Rights. So I say that yes, yes, safe mobility is a necessary component of many other rights in the Bill of Rights. But for the purpose of this, of my study currently, I'm looking at the safety aspect of it, and I hence thought that locating that within the environmental right would be the most adequate and apt way of looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you for being so thorough with the questions. I think we can briefly then go back to Heloïze and just pose the questions to her. Dr. Lokhat, I see you have a question or two for Heloïze.
Hi, very briefly, it was just asking about examples that we could have in practice realistically of nature-based solutions, just to kind of bring the presentation into a bit more of a practical realm.
Thank you very much, Rosalna. Do you want to ask your question? Otherwise, I'll pose it. She asked if there's a reason why you didn't include the Waste Management Act for sustainable urban development. Melandri, do you want to summarize yours? If you struggle, perhaps I can just ask you. She asked about the ongoing water crisis in Cape Town, and it showed the failure of green initiatives. And she also refers to the Working for Water program, as well as removing of alien trees. I think it's more of a comment that you can take that. Maricel, you also had a question for Heloïze. You want to pose it?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Heloïze, I was wondering how successful, to your knowledge, has secondary cities, as that's the focus of your study, been in implementing nature-based solutions within their jurisdictions? And I was wondering if you think that secondary cities can adopt any nature-based solutions or lessons from the metros in South Africa. I was wondering if you perhaps considered that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maricel. Adelaide, you want to pose your question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Heloïze. I just wanted to find out if any nature-based solutions can or have been applied to provide relief from flooding in urban areas, or if it is perhaps too late for existing cities, and so that could be applied maybe for the proposed new cities, or maybe in upgrading rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof. Patterson, do you want to pose yours?
Mine's for Heloïze. I find it always, I think I've reflected in my question, but I always find it's very difficult when I work in this biodiversity space because there's so many associated and often overlapping terms and concepts and approaches which different disciplines bring to the area or the biodiversity space. And I've listed them, some of them, they're nature-based solutions and ecological or natural infrastructure, natural capital. You could add to that green infrastructure, landscape approaches, ecosystem goods and services, ecosystems approaches, And I always struggle because when I'm framing a research question, how do I distinguish between these different concepts when they overlap with one another? And I would love your guidance as to when framing your particular study, the scope of your study, how did you manage to tame this complexity and overlap and settle on nature-based solutions as your key theoretical lens through which to evaluate South Africa's relevant legal framework? And as I said, I hope it makes some sense. If it doesn't, you can just ignore it. But it's something which I struggle with frequently doing research in this area.
Thank you, Professor Patterson. Heloïze, do you want to answer the questions?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Willemien. I will be very brief with my answers. So firstly, the question by Dr. Lokhat, and then I want to combine my answer with the answer I would have provided to Maricel, since the questions relate so much. I think the urban farming and urban gardens that we see in Johannesburg and Cape Town that's recently been popping up is a very good example of how nature-based solutions could be implemented in cities in South Africa. So the concept of the environment of the urban farms are very related to the green roofs and green walls we see overseas. But the main problem there is that it has only been implemented, to my knowledge, I stand to be corrected, in the metros. So Maricel, yes, there's definitely some room to for the secondary cities to learn from metros that in this scope. What drew me to secondary cities, or one of the factors that drew me to secondary cities, was that our secondary cities are surrounded by natural areas. I'm just going to take a brief example that quickly comes to mind. The wetland and the river and the dam system in Potchefstroom. So it's in the middle of the city, it's in the heart of Stroom, and if this is being utilized correctly by city management, it could easily be converted into this nature-based solutions that that has proven to be such great success overseas. So it's not necessarily directly implemented in secondary cities as far as I know, but the tendencies towards nature-based solutions in metros could definitely provide some guidance to secondary cities. Then the question by Rosalna about the Waste Management Act. The answer to that is very, very disappointing. Actually, my dissertation only allowed me 10,000 words, and that was including my references and footnotes. So I looked into environmental law as well as local government law. So I really had to keep the number of legislative provisions that I examined to a minimum, while still providing relatively sound conclusions. So that's basically the only reason why I had to cut some of the sectoral legislations, environmental legislation. Then the question by Prof. Patterson about the wide scope of nature-based solutions. That I did a lot of reading up, and I came to the conclusion that in the broad sense, nature-based solutions is the umbrella concept for many of the other infrastructures and systems approach and all the approaches you mentioned there. So I decided not to attach a term that I can use throughout the dissertation. I used nature-based solution, but that's why I took the two elements, the protection of ecosystem and then the addressing social, economic and environmental challenges, because most of those systems have these two elements in common. And then just to provide the reader with a concrete term that they can conceptualize, I used nature-based solutions. But in the exposition of the of my dissertation, I state that nature-based solutions is more like an umbrella concept, and then it encompasses many of these strategies and approaches that you mentioned there. So once again, I was quite constrained with space, so it made it difficult to name all these and quickly provide some background to substantiate this approach. But I try to mitigate the effect of using an umbrella term by evaluating the legal framework based on these two elements. And then the flooding in urban areas question, nature-based solutions isn't necessarily a 2-minute noodle instant solution. It is something that that must be implemented when there is new development, or in the cases of green roofs or the urban farms we see, it can be integrated into existing infrastructure, but it won't necessarily provide instant relief or instant solutions to these types of problems that we see. So these urban floodings and the water crises that are currently being experienced in some parts of the country is the wake-up call for other parts of the country that is not yet there, but going to reach that point is some other time in the future. So for them to then be able to turn to nature-based solutions and for this long-term effects, these lessons learned in other areas could provide some or other motivation to areas not yet experiencing that intensity or aggravating effects of these challenges we experience. I believe I addressed all the questions now. Yes, seems like it.
Thank you very much, Heloïze, and thank you to all three the speakers. It was an excellent discussion. You can see it from the questions raised by the speakers, and we can carry on till tomorrow morning, but there's unfortunately not enough time. Thank you also again to Utah for the sponsorship of our sessions, and it will again be raised in our next session. Please don't go away. There are prizes to be won after the next session. And thank you again for all the excellent speakers throughout all of both of the 2 days, and I think they were excellent. And I think sometimes they are better than some of us who have been there for a long time and tried to speak in public. Well done. And you can, everyone can congratulate themselves for a job well done. I'll give you quickly a 3-minute or 5-minute break. Let's reconvene at in about 3 minutes. So you can grab coffee, and then we will proceed with the next session. And thank you also to Felix for being a co-host. Thank you to all, and we'll see each other in 3 minutes.
Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. So my name, for those who do not know me, my name is Dr. John Rantlo. I am with my colleague, Dr. Germare Leone. We are from the Northwest University. We are the reps for Northwest on the ELA EXCO committee. So at this point, we are coming to another session, ladies and gentlemen. It's session 5, and it's our last session for the student conference. So in this session, we are going to be discussing, we are going to have a discussion in which we are going to be talking about the early career researchers, and then we'll be discussing the pressing questions and common connections. So in this session, we have two incredible speakers that I'm going to introduce shortly, that are going to be sharing with us their journey on publication or information that they do have regarding publication, and share some insight with regards to the publication. So the first speaker that I'm going to introduce is Dr. Felix Dube, who was a chair in the previous session. He did a bit of an introduction, but for those who had not joined, I will briefly repeat his bio. So Dr. Felix is a postdoctoral fellow at the Northwest University at CLES, and he is one of the people that are making a very good job of publishing. He has served also as a temporary lecturer in the Faculty of Law, and his area of focus of research is on constitutional law and environmental law. Dr. Felix, I'm heading over to you. If in the next 10 minutes you can share with us your insights when it comes to the inside info when it comes to publishing.
Thank you, John, and greetings to everyone. Can I just take a minute to load up my slide? I seem to be having a bit of some trouble here, John. Just give me just one more minute.
No problem, Doctor. While Dr. Dube is fixing his slides, just a brief reminder that we are still expecting the students to nominate students or nominate themselves to be part of the student reps in the EXCO committee. And we indicated earlier that the benefit of that is that you'll be sitting in the monthly meetings of the EXCO committee of the ELA and make some contribution there representing the students. Dr. Dube, I see you are sorted now. Over to you, my good sir.
Thank you, John. And once more, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers of this conference for the opportunities to speak today on issues of publishing. But I'm not so sure what they promised you, especially the students, on what I'm going to speak about. Because truth be told, I have no advanced knowledge of research and issues of publishing. But I also happen to have published a few papers. That experience has given me some insights into how one can navigate the difficult waters of research. I'm also an assistant editor of the CLES special series that is published on a rolling basis by the Potchefstroom Electronic Law Journal. I recommend that you check it out. So the organizers have asked me to speak about a few things on research, particularly issues of publication, funding, visibility, and networking. I've been given 10 minutes, so I don't think it will be possible to go through everything that they've asked me to do, but I'm going to try to focus more on publishing because it is what I think is more relevant to early career researchers, something that could help someone who is entering the publishing space. I'm assuming that those who are listening now or those who are interested in this presentation are probably early career researchers, LLB, LLM, LLT, or PhD, who are just starting to set their foot in the publishing business, whichever is applicable. So in my little experience with the research, papers fall on two legs, or rather they stand on two legs, one of which is sufficient. On the first part is the editors or the journalists looking for original contributions of knowledge in your paper. So you don't just write for the sake of writing, but you are writing and advancing an argument that makes an original contribution to knowledge. And this is important when you plan about what I am going to write. Then in the event that you don't have any original contribution to knowledge, and that happens and it is not a sin, at least you should have in your paper add some new insights into knowledge that is already in existence. So as I say, new contribution to knowledge or new insights into existing knowledge. If the editors and the reviewers can see that you are making an original contribution to knowledge or you are making new insights into existing knowledge, they are bound to accept your paper. That's what I have begun to appreciate. So, and then when it comes to these original ideas, now that you have your idea, the writing process itself has several stages, and the most important one of which is reading the literature. We live in an age of knowledge. Information is everywhere. Recent books that came yesterday from the biggest publishers in the world are already available online. Journal articles are available online. Cases are available online. Everything is there. So there is vast information to be processed. So for some people, it becomes a bit overwhelming, but I have found that the more you read the literature in preparing to start writing your paper, the better you are. Because you may find that you have this original idea about something, but someone also thought about it, and they've written a paper about it, and they've written such a good paper. So it is very important that one must engage the literature before starting the writing. And then there is an issue of choosing the journal. I've spoken to different people. Some will tell you that we choose the journal before we start writing. Others will tell you that they choose the journal after writing. I am not going to make a recommendation on this one because I've used both and they have worked really well for me. And then let's say now that one has written their paper, you have your paper, now your paper is ready. So now you have to submit it to the journal. I would advise against just sending the paper to the journal because you have to really look at those things that you have to do that could influence the peer reviewer or that could influence the editor. In my little experience, I've found that editors are not so patient when they receive a paper that is not formatted according to their general style. Little issues count: the type of the font, the size of the font, the spacing, the footnotes. So these are things that maybe one may feel that they are not very important. I mean, I've made such a tremendous contribution to knowledge. It is so novel that the editors will salivate on it. But I can assure you that if the paper is not in their style, they are bound to reject it. So if you are lucky, they might say, we have received your paper and we think we can send it to review, but before we do that, please format it according to our general style. It has happened to me, and I think if you have that experience, you're incredibly lucky. In most cases, they're just going to say, this paper is inappropriate. They have got this option, especially if you look at the journals that are using the Taylor and Francis platform, Scholar One manuscripts. They, the editors, have got an option when they are rejecting your paper. They can say the paper is inappropriate, meaning that you didn't put it according to their style. And because they've been working on that style for so many years, they know it in and out. So you have to make sure that everything that they have in the house style, you have complied with and you have cross-checked. And then the other thing that as early career scholars, we tend to ignore, or rather we don't put so much emphasis on, it is the language that you use. and proofreading your paper. This is very important. You might work on your paper for 3-4 months, and you are now so much used to it, and you are now unable to see some of the mistakes in your paper. There is a missing comma there, or there is a full stop missing there, or that sentence needs to be structured in a particular way. Those things influence the peer review process. When you send your paper to the journal, you want the peer reviewers to give you comments, solid comments that can build your paper. You don't want the reviewers to be commenting and saying, you didn't put a comma here, or this word is not appropriate, or this is not the correct word. So you need to make sure that you have dealt with those things. And in some journals, there's actually an option, not an option, actually a requirement, where the reviewer has to state to the editor whether your paper meets the linguistic requirements of the paper. So you have to make sure that on that one, the paper is solid. And then another thing that I usually do, that not usually, always do, before I send my paper to a journal, I share it with colleagues in the same field. Share with colleagues, share with my mentors, supervisors, and they read the paper. You'll be surprised at about how much your paper can be strengthened by letting your colleagues read it, comment it, and then you implement their recommendations. So that one is very important. I think everyone should make sure that their paper goes through that process. And then another thing that most people struggle with is the issue of peer review. But before maybe I go to peer review, let us say you've written your paper, you have really cross-checked it, and you have obtained critical feedback from your colleagues, supervisors, or other professors that you are close to, that you know who can comment on your paper. Now it becomes the stage of submitting the paper to the journal. This, I think, is very, very critical. It is not something that you can usually do in a day. You go to their website and you check what are their requirements. If you go there, you're going to see that the editors have got certain requirements about how your paper should be submitted. It always helps to make sure that you follow every step that the editors have imposed, because it will determine whether they just reject your paper or whether your paper proceeds to peer review. And in my experience, if you make things easier for the editors, they are going to help you to the extent that they can. And now let's say that your paper is going to review, you have received the feedback from the journal attaching the reviewer's comments. This can be a very brutal process because in most cases, I'm not so sure whether it is in my experience, but usually reviewers have very little to say about how wonderful the paper is. They're not going to really focus on the good part, but they are mostly going to focus on what you should have done, how you should strengthen your paper. So at times, the language that the reviewers use is very not so friendly. It could be brutal. So I have learned that it is never about me. They're not talking to me, they're talking about my work. And another person's view of my work is not a reflection of my ability. So you try by all means to implement their recommendations or their directives to the extent that you can. Where you can't, you explain it to the editor. And then if you're lucky and the editorial office says, we have accepted your paper, they're going to process it. And then before they publish it, they're going to send that paper to you. And in my experience, that is one of the most critical stages because they have their own editors there, language editors and style people who do all those things. So sometimes those people can make a mistake. So you have to really read your paper through and make sure that nothing there that is not supposed to be there is there. For example, I wrote a paper with a very popular journal. They accepted my paper. I was very lucky on that one. And then there are editors who were responsible for styling the paper and checking the language, replaced the word check, C-H-E-C-K, with check that has got a Q. So if you're writing about checks and balances, and then you replace that check there with a Q, it becomes check as if it's for money. So if you don't read it as the author of the paper and correct those things, they are going to put that kind of mistake out there and people are going to see it. And that's going to reflect, I think, very poorly on your work. So Dr. Ranko, I see that I have exhausted my 10 minutes. I would have liked to highlight a few things about issues of funding, but I'm not so sure if we have time for that. And also issues of visibility and networking. I always make sure that when I publish a paper, I update my Google Scholar profile. I also put it up on social media, and then also to be seen around. You attend faculty events and conferences, and you begin to meet people. And just one last thing that I've observed on this issue now is that more and more professors and other scholars are coming to social media. You're going to find most of them on Twitter, and sometimes they're going to put their papers there or put some really critical information. So what I've learned is I use my social media for my own entertainment and also for my own intellectual advancement. I follow the right people. There's certain professors, they post events and everything. I remember this year in January, I attended the Global Summit on Constitutionalism because I'd seen it on Twitter. So in as much as we get entertained by social media, we can also use it to network with other scholars. Thank you very much, Dr. Rankler.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dube. That has been very insightful. I was so eager to hear your views when it comes to rejections, coping with rejections from the editors. I know you always have a lot to say on that, but nonetheless, because of time, we will move. I don't know if Dr. Clive is ready to do his presentation. Dr. Clive, are you in the room?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to now go to the second speaker, Dr. Clive Vinti from the University of Free State. He's a lecturer there at University of Free State, and he's also part of the ELA. He's an ESCO member representing the Free State in the ESCO. He's also a program director of the postgraduate module in environmental law and human rights. And his area of research is environmental law and international trade law. And he has also published extensively. So Dr. Clive Vinti, over to you, my good sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rantlo. I think Dr. Dube has basically covered most of the points I wanted to cover, but maybe just to accentuate just a couple of things. Maybe if I can just share my screen. Can you see that? Let me see. How is that? Is that fine?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rantler. So just to accentuate a few things, for me, I think I'll just talk briefly on reviews and visibility, but more particularly on reviews, because visibility is not something that I'm really good at. I virtually have no social media presence apart from LinkedIn, and I hope I keep it that way. But on reviews, I think all reviews are useful, building on what Dr. D was talking about. So all reviews are useful, even the ones that you consider as vile. And I would say in time, sometimes you receive a review that you might think this is actually vile, particularly the tone of the review that you'll be getting for a paper that you've submitted. But in my experience, I am not really, I don't take it personally. When I receive a review, I focus on what I'm being told I got wrong. So you shouldn't worry too much about the tone of the delivery. You must always think about it this way. The person who's reviewing your paper has taken time to actually review your paper, and reviewing is it's quite exhausting in terms of time, and people are quite busy. So with the review, it's an honor for someone to actually sit down and read your paper. Secondly, some people have been working in that field for a long time, and they're quite passionate about certain principles, or they're quite entrenched in a certain way of thinking. So when you come up with an idea and you go sort of in a different direction, it might not be received well. So the tone and the response might not be in the way that you think it would. It might be anyway. So I don't worry too much about the tone or the delivery of a review. I'm always grateful for any reviewer and for the comments, and I always find every comment that I'm given by a reviewer as useful. I think secondly, be open-minded when you receive your paper post the review. So once your paper has been reviewed, be open-minded. Don't be married too much to your own standpoint and your perception. Accept the notion that people will reject your idea, accept the notion that people will disagree with what you say, and be able to contend with that. I particularly enjoy receiving reviews. I enjoy the actual intellectual banter between myself and the reviewer, the ability to actually be able to respond to them. When they say, but you haven't looked at this, or I disagree with your take on that, I particularly enjoy that because it gives me an opportunity to even expand further on my idea or to discount my idea in certain aspects where I don't, where I concede. And be ready to concede on points of logic, right? Be ready to concede on points of logic. You might disagree on a deduction or some point of analysis, but be ready to concede on a point of logic when it's clear that your point is not valid. Don't be entrenched in a position that is obviously untenable. One of the things that I think I was told at the beginning when I was thinking of writing a paper right at the beginning, was my former dean, Prof, to say to me, Clive, get the law correct. And that might seem like a small thing, but it's only when I started to review papers that I started to realize this is actually quite important. So in my mind, when I'm writing a paper, there's a couple of things I think about. Firstly, I need to conceptualize correctly. I need to get the law correct. And secondly, that's the analysis part. So when I see a paper, I see just two main aspects. There's the conceptualization, and secondly, there is the analysis part. I don't worry too much about analysis, and I think all of us sitting here can do analysis. I think the bigger issue from my experience from reviewing papers is just getting the law correct. Because once you get the law wrong, then the analysis cannot be correct. So when I was told that at the beginning of my writing, I didn't really get the significance of it until I started reading papers, and you would see that someone has actually gotten the law incorrect or the conceptualization is wrong. And once you get the principle wrong or the law wrong, your analysis is inherently fatally flawed. The other thing I would say is when you are writing outside of a review, or just writing before the review or post the review, spend more time on the editing. And by editing, I mean writing. I think a lot of people get caught up with thinking about the idea in your mind and you don't put it down. I once attended a workshop, right when I was doing my PhD. I attended a workshop. The name of the workshop was Shut Up and Write. Essentially that. When we got in, the convener stood up and said, please start writing. And whatever it is that comes to your mind about that particular topic you want to write about, write it down, write the idea down, and then you start to work out of it. And at that time, I didn't understand it, but I think I had always sort of functioned that way, right? So when I think of something that I want to write about, an idea, I don't worry too much about, all the research that is out there. I just simply say, what is my idea? And then work out and write it down. And then after that, I look at the literature in the area and I see where my idea fits in, whether it's valid or not, or whether it's been worked on or not. But the first thing is always, if you have an idea, your idea is valid, write it down and then explore, the viability of the idea. But always spend, for me, myself, I conceptualize and then I immediately move to my analysis. I don't worry too much about whether it's perfect or not, or whether, I focus on what I want to say and then I move backwards. So I write in sort of an upside down type of way. I write my idea, do my analysis, and then I go back to the conceptualization. And I spend more time in the editing. And in the editing, that's when you get your narrative across and your point of view across. And I think that's significant in your writing. I think the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to reviews is we all get rejections. Many of the papers that you see that have been published have been rejected sometimes 2 or 3 times before they've been published. So don't have an ego when you write. This is just knowledge. Someone can challenge your knowledge, someone can discount what you say. So do not fret when someone rejects your paper. Focus on what you need to do to fix it. And always know that, like I said, many of the papers you see in a journal published aren't just accepted at first blush. Some papers are rejected many times before they actually get accepted. So it's part of the process. Accept it as it goes. I think the last thing I want to talk about is on visibility. I've been working on it recently now, just trying to, every time you work on a particular area, to follow up your publication with a blog post. And this is something, sort of one of my pet peeves with academic writing. Because sometimes you always wonder how many people actually read the work that you do. Every now and then I receive an email from someone in government or someone in practice, and they say, I need to read this paper of yours, but I can't get access to it. And that has become something major, like a major source of frustration for me, because I'm wondering, who am I actually writing for? When I do my research, you always have to think about your audience, right? So when you're writing, who is your audience? My audience, when I write, is typically, for the most part, is government, right? The regulator. And secondly, the academics in the field. but primarily it's government. And it frustrates me, obviously, if people in government don't have access to it. So blog posts are essentially easier because normally they're more in the, freely available, more accessible websites. The challenge with journal articles sometimes is that they're not readily available. These databases are very expensive, and sometimes people just don't have access to it. So I'm always hoping for open access. I'm always hoping that my work has a wider reach and a wider audience, because I want people to be able to engage with my ideas. I worry a lot when someone's trying to access my paper and they can't get all of it. So, and I think that's where visibility comes in. So sometimes you write a paper in a accredited journal, but also you do a follow-up blog post on either building up on that idea or just add a related incidental point that is related to the paper that you're writing about. And also just doing basic stuff like just notifying your networks on LinkedIn, ResearchGate, and so on the work that you've done. There's a lot of useful engagement that goes on those particular platforms that sort of help you to build, I think, at least a profile, but at least to share your ideas and alert people of the work that you are doing. Dr. Antler, I think I should stop there, just as in respect of time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clive. Thank you so much. That was very insightful. It's a pity we don't have much time. I wish we could engage more, because the two of you have said very interesting things that I think, having interacted with a lot of postgraduate students, these are the issues that we struggle with, but you have addressed them. It's a pity that we don't have much time. Dr. Dube, there is a comment on the chat box. I am not going to read it out because we are way behind our time, and for that I profusely apologize. If you can perhaps answer that question on the chat box. It is from Chantal Moyo. And then there's also a comment from Melandri Steenkamp, who also, I think, it's just a comment linking the CLES series with the Potchefstroom Law Journal. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go quickly to the next part of our session. So in this session, we are going to be dealing with awarding prizes. So the first prize that we will be dealing with is the ELA essay competition for 2021. So in this period, we had 5 entries, and then we do have 2 winners for postgraduate and undergraduate. And in order to, and then at this point, I'm gonna hand over to Adelaide Chahopa, who will be announcing our winners. But before she announces the winners, ladies and gentlemen, allow me just to take a minute to thank all the judges who took their time to review the submissions and who provided a full feedback. And it's also, I would like to extend a call to our fellow colleagues in the academia to continue to support the essay competition and avail themselves to do the evaluation. So the idea behind this competition is to promote interest and excellence in environmental law scholarship amongst the next generation of environmental lawyers. So we do believe that this competition is achieving these important goals, and hopefully it will continue to go from strength to strength. And I am hopeful that in the next calls for essay competitions, we will have more entries from the students. So at this point, I am going to hand over to, I'm going to invite Adelaide Chahopa. Adelaide was last year's winner of the essay competition. Adelaide, over to you, madam.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? First, I would like to thank everyone who submitted their work for the essay competition, including all our entrants, Ruth Kruger, Shade Hadjipoulos, Nicola Irving, Ursula Pape, and Puvi Moodley. Thank you so much. The competition was quite close, and I look forward to seeing more work like this as we go forward with the competition. Without further ado, for the LLB and undergraduate category, our first place winner is Nicola Irving, who wins 3,000 Rand, as well as a book prize, which is the 2nd edition of Kids Environmental Law, and an ELA membership for 2022. I can promise you that that membership is amazing because I got to experience that, the benefits of that this year. So congratulations, Nicola. Before you make your speech, I just want to announce the LLM winner, and then you both can take the stage. So for the postgraduate category, our first place winner is Ursula Pape, who also wins 3,000 Rand, the book prize of Land Matters, as well as an ELA membership for 2022. Congratulations to you both, and I hope you submit again next year. And I look forward to that. Please take the stage, and thank you once again.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful for the opportunity and thankful for the award. It's been a very rewarding process, and I will certainly be submitting in the next essay competition. As I pursue my LLM in environmental law. So thank you so much. I'm very, very grateful. And I look forward to engaging with more of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the people who took the time to read the paper, because it was quite a long one. Thank you to Dr. Lokhat for your tireless guidance in the process and for opening my eyes to the world of environmental justice. And to ELA and the sponsors, thank you so much for making this prize available and for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Nicola and Ursula. And on that note, let's thank our sponsor. Of course, it's Juta, for their generous contributions towards this conference. Of course, also their continued support for the Environmental Law Association, obviously also in their publications, how they address environmental concerns. So thank you, Juta. And this brings us to the very last part of today, and this is the awarding of the best student presentations. Now it was a difficult task to determine the best student presenter, but we had to choose 3 people, 2 runner-ups, and a winner, of course. And in the 3rd place, we would like to announce that Maricel Botes did quite well. She's in the 3rd place. Maricel, you will be winning 800 rands, as well as a book prize, environmental management, thanks to Juta. And then in the 2nd place, Nomhlanhla, you will be winning 1,000 rands, as well as a book prize. And the book there is The Land Matters. And for the winner, I'm going to give over to the previous winner of this competition. Ali, will you please take over now?
Hello, everyone. I just want to say that public speaking isn't easy, and you guys have done amazing in your presentations, especially since we're using this online platform. I keep telling my students we're all professionals here, and you guys were very professional in your presentations. So you guys were evaluated on 6 elements: the preparedness of your presentation, the content of your presentation, the structure of your presentation, the display and use of visual aids, delivery and response to questions. And our winner for this year comes from yesterday's session. Our winner is Ruth Kruger, who spoke on the topic of The Environment is Ours, the social economic promise of Section 24 of the Constitution. And your prize is a 1,500 Rand cash prize, along with a book from Juta, Land Matters. So well done. Very pleased. I hope you are pleased as well.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I'm just going to kindly ask our winners just to switch on their cameras so that we can screenshot their faces just for a minute. I'm going to start with Maricel. And congratulations, guys.
Actually, everybody can please open up the cameras for a nice screenshot of very successful conference. Yes, in addition to Jutta, perhaps while you open up your cameras, of course, we need to like to thank Penguin Random House for their book, Land Matters, that's going to the first to the runouts. All right.
All right, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just now going to wrap up and close. So at this point, I just wish to extend our gratitude to the ELA, ESCO, and the conference committee for organizing this session and all the hard work that they did in putting this together. And then I would also want to extend the gratitude to the Secretariat, who also did quite a lot of work behind the scenes and continues to do so to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And we have already thanked our sponsors, but you know, we can never thank them enough, Jutta and Penguin, for the prizes that they gave us. And also the evaluators, the academics that evaluated both the student as a competition and the best presenters. We want to thank them and thank you everybody who took their time. We know we have a very busy schedule, and we thank you for taking your time and joining this conference. So we have come to the end of the conference, at this point, I also want to take this opportunity to invite you also for to the annual conference that will be starting tomorrow on Wednesday. And our first session on Wednesday, we will be let me quickly check my program, will be at 7 o'clock in the evening. So please join us as we'll be continuing with the annual conference. There are interesting abstracts that have been submitted. We're going to have very interesting presentations. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And I also want to thank my colleague, Dr. Hermary. She kept me company throughout the entire conference and made sure that everything is running smoothly. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful evening.